Good afternoon.
Good to see you.
Are we heading towards a global conflict? The Pentagon is preparing for a major war with China, and Europe might be left to fend for itself. How does this affect you and the future of the US economy? Stay tuned because we're about to break down critical statements on international relations and what it means for your financial future. In a rapidly changing world, the United States' military priorities and its relationships with global powers like China and Russia could reshape the global economy. If you're an investor, a business owner, or someone concerned about the economy, understanding these shifts is essential. This is more than just politics. This is economics on a global scale. In this video, I'll break down the economic impact of these developments, showing how they could affect global trade, energy prices, and your investment strategy. So stick around for key insights on where things are headed. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get started.
Two questions, please. The first one, the Washington Post published a story recently that refers to an internal guidance by the Pentagon that basically says everything needs to be prepared for a major war with China. And that also says that in the event that American troops are bound by such a war or the threat of such a war, Europe could not rely on troop reinforcements from the US. Which indications do you have for such scenarios? And what does it mean for the defense plans of the alliance?
Here, the Pentagon is signaling a potential shift in US military priorities. If the US were to become involved in major conflicts with China, Europe might no longer be able to rely on American military reinforcements. From an economic standpoint, this raises questions about the future of US military spending and international defense commitments. If the US focuses more on China, it could mean increased defense spending in the Indo-Pacific region, which could impact the defense budget overall. American military contractors and companies that focus on this region might see increased demand for military equipment and infrastructure. However, this could also lead to less spending on European defense initiatives, which may result in higher costs for NATO members who will need to ramp up their own defense efforts. The broader economic implications could include shifting trade priorities as military commitments often influence diplomatic and trade policies.
Clearly, what we need to do is to make sure that we have everything it takes to defend our Euro-Atlantic area. And we also know that threats are manifold, also outside the Euro-Atlantic area. And that means that when it comes to the US, but also to other NATO allies, and for the alliance as a whole, that we have to be aware of what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. That's the reason why we have that close cooperation. And that will also mean that it is understandable also for the US that over time they want to focus more and more also on that part of the world. And it is only logical for the Europeans to step up even more. There are no plans to withdraw or whatever. We know that the US is completely committed to NATO. But I think it is in all our interest that we are able to keep this whole planet stable.
This statement reflects the strategic shift towards the Indo-Pacific, suggesting that the US will gradually shift its focus from Europe to Asia-Pacific as the center of global economic and military competition. As the US increasingly emphasizes its commitment to the Indo-Pacific, it makes sense that European allies would need to take on more of the responsibility in securing NATO's Euro-Atlantic area. From an economic perspective, the US may reduce its military footprint in Europe, meaning that European countries might need to increase their defense budget. This could lead to increased defense spending across Europe, which might be a positive for European defense contractors. Meanwhile, the United States could see a boost in defense spending in the Pacific, particularly around China, with a focus on advanced technologies and military hardware.
For NATO to focus, of course, very much on our Euro-Atlantic area. But as I said, together with the US at 32, to be very much aware that the threats are not only limited to the Russians. We see the Chinese building up. We see what is happening in Iran. We see what is happening in North Korea. And that's why Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand will join us.
Here, the focus is on a growing range of geopolitical threats. While NATO has traditionally concentrated on Russia, the rise of China, and ongoing challenges in Iran and North Korea have broadened the scope of potential threats to global stability. For the US, this means diversifying its defense strategy to address both traditional and emerging threats, which could influence military spending patterns. Economically, this shift could result in greater demand for diversified defense spending, especially in areas such as cybersecurity, missile defense systems, and advanced military aircraft. US defense contractors are likely to benefit from this expanded scope, while the US government may need to adjust its defense budget to accommodate a broader set of threats, potentially leading to greater spending on these strategic areas.
I was touched that you began the press conference by mentioning Bucha, and your predecessor visited Bucha and said that what happened there was basically an unspeakable crime and that those responsible should be brought to justice. Since then, the U.S., which was contributing personnel and funding to investigations into Russian war crimes, alleged Russian war crimes like in Bucha, they've withdrawn that funding and that personnel. What is your position on that? Do you also believe believe that those responsible for these atrocities must be brought to justice, that there must be accountability for these crimes to have a Europe that is stable in the future. These crimes must be accounted for. And would you like to see the U.S. continue supporting that effort?
This quote raises concerns about U.S. involvement in international justice efforts, particularly in the wake of the war crimes in Bucha. The withdrawal of U.S. funding and personnel from war crimes investigations could impact the international perception of the U.S. commitment to human rights. From an economic perspective, this decision could shift how the U.S. allocates foreign aid. If resources are redirected away from justice and humanitarian efforts, it could create an opportunity for other nations to step in, which could influence international trade and cooperation dynamics. Additionally, U.S. companies involved in these types of humanitarian efforts might face reduced contracts and fundings, impacting both non-governmental institutions and the private sector.
Russia officially denied the U.S. proposals for ceasefire in Ukraine, saying that it does not meet the core Russian demands. But we all remember that the core Russian demands just withdrawal of NATO troops to the borders of 1997. Well, I'm just curious what kind of response could be here from NATO side.
If the conflict continues, we might see continued volatility in these markets, leading to inflationary pressures and increased energy costs for U.S. consumers and businesses. Moreover, the uncertainty could affect U.S. exports, especially to European countries that are heavily reliant on energy supplies. Defense spending may also continue to rise in response to the ongoing threat, with further investments in military readiness.
I would not take it all too seriously. Of course, we have to look into it always and have to react to it. But I mean, this is also how he tries to negotiate. And as I said, I commend President Trump for breaking the deadlock, for getting the discussion going, for getting this initial 30-day ceasefire on the energy infrastructure, steps taken about on the Black Sea. Of course, we hope for more. And I know that the American administration is working day and night to get it done.
The credit is given to President Trump for his role in initiating a temporary ceasefire. While a 30-day ceasefire is just the start, any reduction in hostilities can be beneficial for economic stability, particularly in energy markets. A pause of violence in Ukraine could lead to more predictable energy prices, benefiting the global economy, including U.S. businesses. If the ceasefire holds or expands into a longer-term peace agreement, the U.S. could see improved relations with European allies, reducing defense costs. Trade could also resume more freely in the region, which would benefit industries dependent on Eastern European markets.
It's good that the Americans have now started this process, and that was important because somebody had to break the deadlock. I always assumed if President Trump would be elected that he would try to do so, and he has done so, and I think that is good, and we completely support those efforts. And we have to take it from here, and we have to make sure that whatever happens, that when there is a deal ultimately struck and or a sustainable ceasefire is ultimately organized, that it has to be clear to the Russians that they cannot do this again, that this has got to stop.
This is a recognition that breaking the deadlock is a positive first step. A sustained ceasefire, if achieved, could bring immediate benefits to U.S. businesses, particularly in the energy sector. Stabilizing the region would reduce risk premiums on energy markets, lowering costs for consumers and easing inflationary pressure.
The position of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe is traditionally held by an American. There have been some reports, though, that the U.S. is considering giving that position up. I'm wondering if that happens, what would that mean for NATO, and what would that mean for the U.S.'s influence in NATO?
Well, these are what-if questions, and I've seen other than some of these rumors and reports. Indeed, in your newspaper, I've not seen any concrete proposals on this, so I don't want to react on what-if questions.
The potential loss of the U.S. holding the position of Supreme Allied Commander would signal a significant shift in NATO's structure. Economically, this could indicate a shift in the U.S.'s role in international defense and global leadership. If the U.S. steps back from this position, it could prompt NATO members to reassess their own defense budget, leading to greater costs for individual nations. Additionally, this might influence global economic stability, as NATO has been a critical part of maintaining peace in Europe.
And now you have to ask a nice question.
That's a nice question. Okay,
No.
okay. So there was quite a few issues have raised considerable concern about the cohesion in NATO. Think about Greenland. Think about the direct contacts between the US and Russia without Europe being present. How would you characterize the atmosphere in your house at this moment?
Well, as I said last week in Warsaw, I know know there has been some tough language. I know that there have been allies, for example, on this side of the pond being worried about the long-term commitment of the US to NATO. The Americans have stated again and again, we are committed to NATO, we are committed to Article 5. This commitment comes with a clear expectation that on this side of the Atlantic and Canada, we will spend more, commit that we will really deliver on the 2%, and then move upwards because of these gaps we still have.
Finally, this statement reaffirms the US's commitment to NATO with an increased focus on defense spending. For the US economy, this likely means more investment in defense technologies and infrastructure. However, this also implies that United States taxpayers will bear a larger share of the burden in addressing both Russian and Chinese threats. While this will drive innovation and create jobs within the defense sector, it could also increase the national debt, leading to potential long-term economic consequences. So here's the key takeaway. Shifting global priorities from China to Eastern Europe are shaping a more complex future for international relations in the US economy. With increased defense commitments, it's vital to understand how this affects everything from military spending to energy prices and your financial stability. If you found this helpful, like and subscribe to Investinality for more insights on global economic trends. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Should the US focus more on China or continue supporting NATO? Drop a comment below. Next week, we'll dive into US fiscal policy and how it could impact your investment portfolio. Don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.
Great. See you later this week.